Thank you, members of the UN, ladies and gentlemen. I address you as founder of the Scottish Sovereignty Research Group and as associate professor and longtime teacher of US history, political systems, and law. And during my more than a decade working on constitutional issues for an independent Scotland, I've drawn a parallel between this constitutional position of the 13 American colonies in 1776 and that of current-day Scotland. It is therefore my contention that based on this comparison, the Scottish people are legally and morally justified in seeking to unilaterally alter their constitutional status within the UK and exercise their right to self-determination. In the words of the U.S. Declaration of Independence of 1776, which incidentally was largely inspired by the 1320 Scottish Declaration of Arbroath, quote, that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their powers from the consent of the governed, that whenever any form of government becomes destructive to these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or to abolish it, to institute new government, laying its foundations on such principles and organizing its powers in such form as to them shall seem most likely to reflect their safety and happiness. The parallels between the 13 colonies in 1776 and Scotland since 1707 are compelling. Then, as now, the UK lacks a written codified constitution. This is allowed to manipulate its constitutional relationships with its colonies and constituent nations, including Scotland, so as to ensure an overwhelming and perpetual asymmetry of power favoring the mother nation, of course, that being England. A relationship of superior and subordinate, dominant and dominated, colonizer and colonized. In the age of imperialism, this model prevailed and so was considered normal and acceptable. Continuation of this model in the 21st century is anachronistic and increasingly found unacceptable by the constituent nations of the UK. I shall now examine three areas of what I call constitutional incongruity between Scotland's current constitutional position within the UK and its historical values and traditions. That's to say, three constitutional and governmental constraints imposed on Scotland without their express consent that are not in keeping with that nation's ancient constitutional and foundational principles, even in direct opposition to them. These are differing notions of sovereignty, a clash between Scottish and Westminster notions of ultimate power, Westminster's governing incapacity, that is the system's inability to fairly, competently, or effectively govern its constituent nations and colonies, and the third, disregard for Scotland's national interests, in that Westminster government places Scotland's interests as tertiary or altogether non-existent. These 3 points, when taken collectively, provide full justification for Scotland to exercise its rights to self-determination without any hindrance from the UK government. So, the first incongruity I will address is the conflicting views of sovereignty between Scotland and England. As has been said before, the English Dycean view holds that sovereignty is uniquely retained by the Crown and Parliament and is held to be divinely ordained, indivisible, and holds absolute power unconstrained by legal precedent and answerable to no external institution. This means that powers granted to constituent nations and colonies can be arbitrarily and unilaterally altered or withdrawn. Under this system, rights, including freedom of expression and self-determination, are not constitutionally entrenched because the UK lacks a codified constitution or a legally enforceable Bill of Rights. The 1953 ruling in the case of McCormick versus Lord Advocate by Scotland's most senior judge, Lord Cooper, states that the English doctrine of unlimited parliamentary sovereignty, quote, has no equivalent in Scottish institute constitutional law. Yet, that alien doctrine is held to invariably take precedence over the Scottish legal and constitutional tradition. The Scottish concept of sovereignty, rooted in documents like the Declaration of Arbroath and the 1689 Claim of Right, is based on the idea of popular sovereignty, that the people are the ultimate source of power. These two concepts of sovereignty are wholly incompatible and irreconcilable. The UK has so manipulated its constitutional arrangements as to ensure that the English doctrine of parliamentary sovereignty consistently overrides the Scottish principle. This reinforces Professor Black's contention that England and Scotland were never equal partners, but that England was effectively extended into Scotland, or put it another way, Scotland was annexed by England. The second incongruity is that Westminster's system's inability to govern Scotland in a fair and competent manner that people have a right to expect. There's a parallel here with the grievances of the American colonies of 1776, which protested Westminster's unresponsiveness to protest and the violations of the various colonial charters which governed the colonies at the time, which denied them the right to develop the laws, constitutional arrangements, and governing structures which best serve their needs, priorities, and aspirations. Scotland is governed through the Scotland Act according to principles indistinguishable from these colonial charters. Westminster unilaterally determines the governing structures, the competence of Scotland without their input, let alone consent. Even after the infamous 2014 vow prior to the referendum and the subsequent revisions of the 2016 Scotland Act prompted by the Smith Commission, the UK failed or declined to deliver on any aspects of its purportedly solemn promises of maximum devolution, or Devomax as it came to be called. The final constitutional incongruity is the fact that that Scotland's vital national interests are at best marginalized in UK policy and all too frequently discounted altogether. This year, Scotland's only petroleum refinery in Grangemouth was shut down when public investment could have saved it. Also, there was a serious nuclear accident at the Fasland Trident submarine, about which information is practically non-existent, despite the potential release of substantial amounts of toxic material. These are but two examples of a long-standing pattern, including deindustrialization and mass privatization under Margaret Thatcher, the undermining of trade union rights, the early imposition of the poll tax in Scotland in 1989, prior to the rest of the UK, and myriad other actions which were, by any objective account, deleterious to Scotland's national interests. A government with Scotland's interests at heart and appreciation of basic Scottish constitutional principles would never even have contemplated such actions. Yet, the people of Scotland were and remain powerless to prevent or mitigate impositions which are clearly injurious to their nation. It is therefore my central contention that, taken collectively, and one could add many other factors that were enumerated today, these through incongruities, diametrically opposed views on sovereignty, the unwillingness of the UK to allow their colonies and constituent nations to constitutionally adapt to better govern themselves, and complete disregard for vital Scottish national interests in UK decision-making constitute sufficient legal and moral justification to be classified as a non-self-governing territory and to be listed for decolonization by the United Nations. I thank you, the audience, for your attention.